White, who said, you know, there's a little movement going on, and I think you'd be happy getting involved with it. Boy, did I get involved with it.
Yeah, boy, did you.
Okay, and I'm very proud of the fact that I was instrumental in forming one of the most effective groups in the Republican Party in Spokane County. Doesn't happen without all of you. At the same time, I was saddened because the division just kept getting worse and worse. The rhetoric, we cut right away. Jerry, you'll remember.
No, you don't.
Yes, you do.
Okay, I do.
Yes, you do. When I said, stop with the rhetoric, right? We don't act like that. That was 10 years ago. Through the Ron Paul and the Mitt Romney and through the campaigns and the running against Kathy and all of this, things became almost unbearable within our Republican Party. November last year, we all got together and darn it, Donald Trump's president. Okay? 3 weeks ago, I got a call from someone that I actually have a great deal of respect for, and we have worked together many times. And she said to me, I want you to come. She says, I've got this crazy idea. And I said, oh boy. She says, I want you to come to Northwest Grassroots. My first reaction was, it really seriously was. And she says, no, and then I'll come to RSC. Now I knew that both of us were going to be out on a limb a long ways with that one. But as the rhetoric becomes better, and I'm not saying it's good, because it's not. We have a long way to go, people. But as I consider running for another higher office, as I get to know all of our absolutely wonderful Republicans, that we have one Democrat in that county, offices up there. You know that? One. The rest are
Vicki.
Dalton.
Oh, Vicki Dalton, yeah.
Right. The rest are Republicans. So wonderful, good people. So Cecily says to me, she says, come on down to Northwest Grassroots. And I thought, well, I'm going to have to just go ahead and make that move and do it. I'm not going to lie to anybody. So I stood up in front of the group and I said, you don't like me. You don't know me, but you don't like me. And I have to be honest, I don't like a lot of you. And then I said, but that's not really what it's about, is it? We are watching our county, especially the city of Spokane, the state, turn to the left in such a big way that I become more and more concerned about the division as time goes by. Now, are we always going to agree on everything? No. Are we going to support each other's candidates? We should be supporting the best candidate. There is an issue that I find really I struggle with, and that's perception. Because perception becomes reality for people. And perception unchallenged is reality. So perception being what it is, I took Cecily up on her offer and I went to Northwest Grassroots because the perception that we are unapproachable to each other, the perception that we do not have the ability to work together for a common cause, the perception that they're rotten and we're always righteous or vice versa is not reality. We do work together on certain things. What we need to do is get darn well better at it. We need to tone down the rhetoric. Cecily did a presentation of how our country is sliding to the left, and I asked her to do that for us here tonight. And then we will do a question and answer period. She's a big girl. I was there. I'm a big girl. I took some flack after the meeting. Please remember that she's a guest in our house. She is my friend, and I'd like to introduce her to do her presentation at this time.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Beva. And before I start, what I really want to say is, Al brought up that one of the reasons he is staying on and running for a third term is to provide that continuity at the county because, 2 new commissioners, and you get 1 new commissioner, and you'd have something looking like the Spokane County Central Committee. And I know that Beva hasn't been on the SCRCC board, but she's certainly been involved in the county politics for a good long time, and she has that foundation and basis. And that organization desperately needs somebody with Beva's leadership. So all of you PCOs, get the word out. Be sure to attend the Central Committee meeting, which I think is the 10th of March. And we'll get emails out to our quote group. You get emails out to your group. But I honestly don't think anybody is going to be stupid enough to run against her. So it should be a very fast meeting. But it needs to happen. Okay. So Beva asked me to sort of talk about what I did at Grassroots a week ago, but she asked me to shorten it. So I very happily am shortening it. So when you look at this slide, it sort of infers that the GOP and the Democrats, just have the big battle going on. But like Beva said, what I want to do tonight is really talk about what is going on within the Democratic Party, the factions that are there, and what faction seems to be winning. So, how many times in the last 8 years is all I've been involved in this county's politics, but how many times have you heard, this is the most important election of your lifetime? Right? I mean, every one of them is the most important election of your lifetime. This year, I honestly think it's a true statement. I get scared when I think that historically the off-year elections, the party not in power normally gains seats, all those kinds of things. The rhetoric about Trump has not calmed down one darn bit. And those folks are angry, they're energized, and they really think they have a point to play. And they are going to get their voter base out. So have a quick little video here of the sort of historic shift to the left of the country. I mean, it's not just the Democrats, it is where we've gone.
So why has it been so easy for them to get people on the left who aren't communists to push forward their agenda? Once I looked at the political scale, it all started to make sense. On the far left, you have 100% government, and on the far right, zero government. Anarchy is no government and doesn't make sense at all. On the far left, you have socialism, communism, and Nazism. All systems that have a socialist form of government with only slight variances between them. Traditionally, Republicans were slightly to the right of center, and Democrats were slightly to the left. In recent years, though, through the radical influence of the media, Hollywood, and the multitude of Marxist professors in our universities, both parties have slid to the left. With the Democrats going so far, they have openly joined hand in hand with the radicals. That's why they all work together. All the groups on the left now have the same goal, a socialist America.
So when you look at this graph here, it looks a little bit discouraging. You're seeing 72 million registered Democratic voters, 55 million Republican voters, and 42 million independents. So the deciding factor, obviously, is in that independent group. So we need to figure out who they are and what's important to them. But that's not really the whole story. We also need to look at the factions within the Democratic Party. Now, we all know, we've talked about them, the Republican Party has factions, the Democratic Party has factions. Maybe we hear about the Republican ones a little bit more because we tend to hang out with Republicans. So we're pretty familiar with them. I don't go to Democratic meetings and things that way. Maybe they're just the very same as we are. So tonight I want to talk about the Democrats because we all know where we land on this graph. And of course, we all know we're right. So it doesn't really matter about talking about where we are. So let's start talking about the Democrats. Closest to the center, the neoliberal or neoconservative Democrats, okay? So think Joe Biden or something that way when you're thinking that way. So this group, the conservative wing, we'll call them, of the Democratic Party, is mostly known as for the southern states, border states, that kind of thing. Within the Democratic Party, they're labeled dinos. Does that sound familiar to any of you? Right? And they're also, in our terminology, we call them blue dogs. The Democrats call them yellow dogs. They just turn their tails and run, kind of inference to the yellowness there, right? So a yellow dog or a blue dog can be a critic of Wall Street as well as being pro-life, pro-gun, pro-union, restricting immigration, those kinds of things. So they have quite a few things actually in common with us. And so it's really a group that we need to be keeping our eye on. And probably many of you know that in 1972, a large group of those neoliberal conservative Democrats switched and became Republicans just because of the trending of the Democratic Party with George McGovern, and it was quite an interesting shift, and I think we possibly could see that again. We sure want to anyway. So the liberal wing, or the middle ring of the Democratic Party, we'll call them the establishment, they think that big government can solve everything. And you just need more laws, you just need more regulations, and obviously you need a lot more taxes. The few interesting things about this group is that 15% of this group supports the idea of allowing a business to be able to discriminate based on their religious beliefs. So, you shouldn't have to provide a wedding cake if you don't want to for whatever reasons, those kinds of things. 22% oppose the legalization of marijuana. 12% oppose same-sex marriages, and 8% believe homosexuality should be discouraged. The other thing that's interesting with them is that that 41% identify themselves as liberal on economic issues. So that leaves your 59% that are not as liberal on the economic issues as the other group. And so, with the economy doing what it is, with Trump being able to do what he's doing, maybe some of those people who are feeling more conservative in the economic area might be thinking a little bit more toward Republicans also. Now, to me, this group is the most concerning. And they seem to be dominating the party. They may not have the numbers, but they've sure got the loudest voices. And they sure have the numbers of people that are active and figuring out how to get attention. I thought it was interesting that 41% reside in affluent households and 49% of them are college graduates. Now, of course, they want everybody to be equal, and you have your fair share as far as economics and wages and income, but I don't think they want to give up their affluent households, but they'd like everybody else to, kind of thing. So in this group, think of Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Tom Perez, Keith Ellison, Maxine Walters, those kinds of folks. You know who they are. They like that $15 minimum wage, Medicare for all, free college, wipe out college debts, just capitalism's bad. You mention capitalism to them and they think it's terrible. They don't recognize that's a form of, it's an economic term. It's not describing a society, but you'd figure that was just one terrible thing. We obviously don't need a strong military. They probably don't think we need a military at all. So this is the group I want to focus on, because I really do think that they're the ones that are causing the most disruption. And I don't know if they, I don't want to go where they want to lead us, shall we put it that way. So if we wanted to call these folks Marxists or communists or anything that way, you'd sort of be laughed at and put down on the whole thing. But there's really interesting things when you go back and look at some of the old philosophies that started back in the 1800s even. So in broad terms, there are 4 parts of a free market system that would really need to be targeted in order to really radically change a society like ours to a socialistic society. So we have there destroy the family. Well, why would you want to destroy the family, and how would you go about it? So one of the most influential things was taking the responsibility away from the family and turning it over to the government, let's say in education. That was a huge move. I was surprised. I attended an event a couple, I guess it was last week, where the literacy rate of our colonists' men, I had to look it up to make sure the numbers I was looking at, was actually higher back in the, that would be the 18th century, than it is now. It was 90% literacy rate back then for those folks who were educated, in the
1600s.
No.
Our founders, right?
Right, it was the 18th century, so 1700s. Okay. Yeah. And women were only 48% because, of course, they didn't need to be educated. But that's another part of the thing. So I think education, you probably do recognize, has really changed the structure of how we raise children and those kinds of things. But more recently, because how we started government schools and things, that all started before we were born, so, we can't look at that one. But more recently, think of the feminist movement. All of a sudden, you were ridiculed for being a stay-at-home mom. You were just a second-class citizen. You weren't contributing anything to society. You were cooped up in home, taking care of children, raising children. You were just wasting your potential. And how many times have you heard when you've asked a woman, what is it that you do? And they said, well, I'm just a housewife. It's really sad that we just really dismantled that entire role in a family. So women deserved a career, which then evolved into equal pay and all that good kind of stuff. Being a wife and mother was no longer important. And then pretty soon our divorce rates started to become accepted, and divorce was easy to obtain, and more it was happening. Right now the divorce rate in America is over 40%, and fewer than half of our kids today live in a traditional family home. So you really start wondering, what is going on with our society? A lot of it has to do with just the total breakdown of families. And of course, this new kind of family was introduced to television shows and things that way that you're going, wow. And these new television shows really were showing them that this new way of life with the working mom and the single parents and all this kind of stuff were normal. This is how it was supposed to be. So I'd say family is really well on its way to be destroyed. And I want you to ask yourselves of your kids or your grandchildren, how many of them would think that any of the things that I really mentioned here tonight were anything, really? They're thinking how it is now is just the way it always has been. They aren't going to question it. So the next thing on the list was destroying private property. So what about property rights? Well, they're constantly being challenged by regulation and laws. Our environmental laws are pretty crazy. And people, I'm going to lift this up a little bit here because I get bending down and it doesn't work. So Americans have been prevented from building homes, from plowing fields, filling ditches, allowing their cattle to graze, doing this, doing that, all because of different regulations. And you add to that restrictions under Endangered Species Act, Clean Water Acts, those kinds of things, and it's really getting to the point of why do you want to own private property? And just recently in our area, in our state, think of what the Hearst decision did. I mean, that is really, I mean, is that pushing against your property rights? Absolutely it is. And again, it's really legislating from the bench, which we're not supposed to be doing. So property rights are being really stretched. But this one it really goes into the religion or the moral fiber of this country. And the foundation that this country was founded on, we all know what it was. John Adams' quote, we're all familiar with it. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. And so if we become a people that don't have, have lost that foundation, that don't have the distinction between right and wrong and that kind of thing, what is going to happen to the country that we know? It's not going to exist anymore. So when you look at what I've written here, unthinkable to radical, radical to acceptable, etc., what is that meaning? It's sort of meaning, how do we get things that we 100 years ago would have looked at somebody who had even mentioned this and said they're out of their minds, to now it's acceptable. So think of, so when you're looking at radical, unthinkable to radical, think of something that just is unthinkable, is perverse. It's something that our moral character would not allow to happen, okay? And it's just going to start discussion, probably some pretty lively discussion. So then, when you move to that next step of radical to acceptable, let's say that the idea that you came up with to present to whatever was the idea of killing a baby as it exits the womb. Well, if that was said to you, I mean, you're sitting there going, no way. I mean, that you just can't do that. That is very radical if you look at it years ago. So now let's call that dilation and extraction. So it sort of becomes a medical term. And then we can add reasons why this needs to happen, things that way. And slowly abortions become acceptable to a society that believes killing babies and infants is immoral. And that's where we are today. Or what about marriage, other than between a man and a woman? I mean, in my lifetime, you never, ever would have thought that that would have happened. That was a pretty radical concept. But add love and equality and taxes and all those other things to the mix, change the label to same-sex marriage, and gradually it becomes acceptable. And then going on to acceptable to sensible. Oh, she's so young, she can't take care of a baby, or you can have those born this way, that kind of thing. We've all heard the rationalizations for accepting something that we feel is not right. We've got to be really careful. We don't want to express that because then we can get labeled as a sexist or a homophobe or a bigot or worse. So we just keep our mouths shut. So when you get to sensible to popular, let's personalize all this, okay? You know somebody that's LGBT, right? You know somebody that's divorced, is that right? It's, or somebody that's had an abortion, and you don't hate those people. In fact, you like those people. They're friends. And so all of a sudden, they're in your school, they're in your family, they're in your church. And so if you don't hate them, how can you disapprove? And all of a sudden, we're in the situation we are. So it's a slow introduction to ideas that you just go, no, that gradually just infiltrates into our lives. So I like this on what this says, if you can't all read it. The heritage of Castro will be felt for generations to come. He's an example for his people, for America, and for the world. One day in the future, Americans will embrace socialism, but we're still far away from that day. Do any of you think that Bernie has really changed over the past 30 years? Absolutely not. Now, fortunately, this guy was a presidential candidate in the early 1900s, but the quote, "The American people will never knowingly adopt socialism, but under the name of liberalism," and what are we hearing today is they're liberals, etc., they will adopt every fragment of the socialist program until one day America will be a socialist nation without knowing how it happened. So for the good of America and all America represents, we have got to defeat this movement and stop that creeping to the left that we see happening right before our eyes and not figuring out how to stop it. So an elephant divided ain't worth peanuts. Republicans unite. And we can only stop them if we unite. We've all heard the united we stand, divided we fall, and that's exactly what we're facing this election. It's exactly what we're facing. And so, like Beva says, maybe all the people at Northwest Grassroots didn't like her. Maybe all you guys don't like me. I don't really care either. But I do know that this is one country that is worth saving, and if we work together, we can do it. Will?
Yeah, I have 2 points that are in the mix now.
I wasn't done, but that's okay. I'll let you keep going. But no, well, let's hear them so we can think about them while they're...
One is a phenomenon that's reared its head this week in the wake of what happened in Florida, and that is now the media is giving all this attention to these young high school kids that are being fed or indoctrinated, and
they're going to have rallies all over the country.
Right. And that's sort of a new sort of phenomenon. The other is technology.
You know, the other thing that is so sad about those people doing those rallies is there are just as many students that are saying if we would arm trained people,
yes,
teachers and guards in the schools, this would not have happened, or we would have had far fewer casualties. They're not getting any publicity whatsoever. Technology, you're absolutely right.
Technology, these movements are literally, they're like a swarm. In a matter of minutes, they're all over the country. I'm not sure what we're going to see here in Spokane, but it's the technology is a factor.
Sure, it is. It is. So let's get on with the problem at hand, and that is voter turnout. Voter turnout in the United States fluctuates in national elections, and you know, for your big presidential election to your off-year elections. But believe it or not, this is a horrible statistic. Only 60% of the people who are registered voters vote in the national presidential type election. 60%. And then it drops down to 40% for off-year elections. And then turnout's even lower for the elections that we just went through, you know, with the nonpartisan city councils and things that way. Both parties are working on voter registration drives. But here in Washington State, I think we do have a little bit of an advantage because since we're both driving to register voters, here in the state we don't have to say I'm a Democrat or I'm a Republican. We get to register and we get to vote, and we get to vote the way we want. Where if you're in a state like New York and you've registered Democrat and want to vote Republican, you have to go through a manipulation to change how you're registered so many weeks before the election, before you know, that kind of thing. So we're lucky in that. So to me, it's about winning hearts and minds, getting the word out, and that's where we're at a disadvantage because we no longer have any regular talk radio call-in shows. We don't have a supportive press, And we've got to get smart. We've got to figure out a way that we can generate interest, that we can generate excitement, and that we can get people off their butts and out there. I mean, doorbelling. I couldn't believe it. Talking to this one guy, and he says, it's just too much work to vote. And I said, well, you know, they mail you your ballot, right? Yeah. And I said, and you get a voter's pamphlet, right? Yeah. And I said, and so you need to mark your ballot, put a stamp on it, and mail it. Well, it's just too much work. Now, probably we don't want him voting, but, you know, it's pretty sad. It is pretty darn sad. So, you know, it's not a good thing. So, you know, the winning side in American politics is always the side that offers the biggest hint. That's probably one reason that you see the Democrats acting as if they want to do something about DACA. Have my opinions on that one. So building a majority requires thinking past left and right. And I like that these are quote experts, successful American parties must be coalitions of enemies. So I think maybe if we can at least get all of our factions to be a coalition and then work on the independents, getting our excitement up, our voter registration up, that kind of thing, maybe we have a shot. So the way I see this coming election is that we've got to suppress the divisions that we have within our party. We know the Republican Party has many factions, if not more than the Democrats. And, you know, I told the group the other night, I bet you never thought I'd say this, but we need to form an alliance with all the factions of the GOP and march lockstep into victory this November. We really have to. To me, this time around, America over party means keeping Democrats out of power. It absolutely does. It's the right thing to do for the America that we know. We cannot keep electing these people. We cannot. I mean, it's sad. It's sad what they're doing nationally, but it's sad what we're doing in Olympia. I mean, we're the health thing, the public health, having to provide abortions, I mean, it just goes on and on and on. So, you know, what it means is it means all-out support for Cathy McMorris Rodgers. A lot of our group don't especially think she's the best person in the world, but she's going to be a heck of a lot better than Lisa Brown. Yeah. And when we talk about Lisa Brown, let's add the last name McClatchy just to sort of mess it up a little bit. And the same goes for Matt Shea. I know a lot of you in this room have problems with Matt Shea. Darn it, he's an effective legislator. You can't tell me any way that he's voted that you don't like. You might not like the way he looks or the way he acts or the things he says, but get behind him. He can
talk to us once in a while.
Well, maybe we can get that done. And we could say that about other people too, you know. It goes both ways. This whole thing goes both ways, guys. So nobody's right. Nobody is right in this situation. We need to work together to retain the seats. And I'm hoping that we can gain enough that we can get the majority in both the House and the Senate in Olympia. It would really make a world of difference. That harassment bill that you were talking about of Monkadunkra is terrible. If you have been convicted of graffiti, that is harassment.
Right.
Can't have a gun. I mean, you know, it's just wrong. So I'm almost done here. So united we stand, divided we fall. Let us not split into factions which must destroy that union upon which our existence hangs. Patrick Henry. So to me, love of country should be far more motivating than hatred for Trump. I do believe that we can pull this out. I appreciate Beva for asking me to be here tonight. And I think we can hold the line if we work together. And we've all heard that if we can get, 5% more voter turnout on the east side of the mountains, if we can do this, if we can do that, it's you know, we can't have to quit talking about it. We've got to get it done. We really do. So that's all I had to say. Thank you for having me.
appreciate that. Now, that was an excellent presentation, and I hope that it opened our eyes up to that there are so many things that we do agree on. I've asked Cecily to take some questions. I know that there are some really hard feelings, group to group, but this is a first step, people. It's a first step. All right? Al French had his hand up first.
Great presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I like to go back to the words of Ronald Reagan, who said, if you believe in 85% of what I believe in, you're a friend, not an enemy. And I think for the most part, all of us agree on a lot of the principles you just articulated, and we really are more friends than enemies.
Thank
So,
you.
absolutely.
Leslie, you had your hand up next.
First of all, I'd say, I like you, Cecily. I love Cecily. Anyway, have you looked at the most recent data on the county, and the voters, and how it's changed in the last 4 years? Because what I've heard recently is that the blue is spreading out towards the red a lot.
Oh, we have to build a wall. It is a problem. I mean, and something that you will see in areas that end up with large college campuses and things that way. So we have a lot more influence of the colleges here in Spokane proper anymore, and you're going to see a lot more influence of the liberal thinking teaching that our kids are getting exposed to. They're getting brainwashed.
Now, there is one thing that Cecily and I, by the way, do not agree on a great many things, just so everybody's aware of that. We're not going to ask everybody to stand up, hold hands, and sing Kumbaya, okay?
Oh!
I told their group I don't really want them to change, that the challenges that I find in what they say and what they do, even though I may not agree, it makes me think. It makes me have a better rounded opinion of why I'm right. And we're not going to, any of us, change, I think, that stance. I am proud of Ozzie Knezovich. I am proud of that 85% approval rating. There will be people in that group that simply will not agree with that. But I'm asking, and Cecily said the other night, she's promised never to call us again rhinos of Spokane County.
Until after the election.
Until after the election. Okay. I don't care. I really don't care, guys. I don't care. Sticks and stones.
It doesn't matter.
I say that the proof is in getting Republicans elected. That's what we set out to do. And I also told their group, I don't apologize for doing that. I happen to believe party is what's best for this nation, and it is the Republican Party.
If you pick better candidates, I might agree with you.
And we will. I think we will. I think that we're coming to that point, and I think accountability is going to be huge in that.
Right.
Jerry?
Yes, I want to talk to you about your graph. You put the Nazis far left and the communists to the right of the communists. I looked this up one time because I was in the discussion. The Nazis allowed private ownership of the factories. They couldn't make lawnmowers, they had to make tanks. And the communists took over the factories. So that'd make them more government than the Nazis.
Well, I didn't make the graphs, so.
Oh, you didn't? Okay. I would have put the communists on the far left because our friend Ted Kennedy, remember him from Massachusetts? He called people to, they called the Nazis right-wingers. And I said, how can they get there? The logic of where they are in the political government to zero spectrum, they're way over there on the left with the communists. Which side of they are on is arguable, I guess, but they're no right-wingers.
Yeah.
And
Well, the difference, yeah.
Well, it depends on how left you are.
Nazi Party means National Socialist Workers' Party. That doesn't sound very right-winger to me.
Well, the real difference between the Marxists and the communists was that the communists really felt that the workers would rise up, they would revolt, they would be able to change through revolution, bloodshed, war, killing. Marxist was more, how do you demolish the foundation of a country? So it was a slow way to get to sort of the same area that, you know,
On the
there.
graph, they don't show where progressives are, and that's what Obama used to call himself.
Well, they
say to people, what's a progressive? I don't know. I think
But
the
that's
reason-
like saying, what's a conservative? A conservative isn't a party, it's an adjective. Okay? We're all, and everybody in this room that I know is a conservative. All right? If we don't get our Republicans reelected and hold the line, that nucleus in the city of Spokane is going to become a cancer that grows throughout the entire county.
Right, but there's your progressives on that
So
slide.
at this point, I would like to thank Cecily for having the guts to come in tonight and talk to us. I appreciate it. I'm going to give a 10-minute break while John stops filming, because we will go into a business session in 10 minutes. If you are a voting member, do not leave. We need you for quorum. Thank you, everybody.